Here's what the Secretary of State had to say at a press conference in Kyiv.
We have tried to make clear that there are two paths for Russia. There is the path of diplomacy and dialogue to try to resolve whatever differences there are peacefully through diplomacy. Clearly the preferable path, clearly the most responsible path, and the one that we would prefer. But there is also the path, if Russia chooses to renew aggression, of confrontation and consequences.
Now, ahead of Blinken's arrival to the region, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov explained Russia's position on this issue, citing NATO's double standard. Listen.
We explained that we cannot accept any demands regarding the actions of our armed forces on our own land. Moreover, we have noticed that while making these demands of moving the troops back to their barracks, as the American representatives worded it, at the same time, NATO members proclaim that whatever is going on NATO's territories, movement of troops, including troops who came to Europe from across the ocean, that doesn't concern anybody but the NATO countries. Well, the double standard is obvious.
All right, for more on all of this, we'll bring in our panel to discuss former UK MP George Galloway and former Pentagon official, our friend Mike Maloof is here. George, to you first. Tony Blinken made a hasty trip to Kyiv today ahead of his newly scheduled talks with Sergei Lavrov in Geneva on Friday. Now, he speaks of diplomacy, but what sort of diplomacy is it when you simply issue sanctions before even talking to the other side? I mean, isn't this the diplomatic equivalent of shoot first, ask questions later?
Yeah, it's called American diplomacy, I'm sorry to say. There's a lot of moving parts here, but first concentrate on what Mr. Lavrov just said there. And imagine that Russian and Chinese forces were on the Mexican border with the USA and the Canadian border with the USA, demanding that the American troops inside the USA return to their barracks. You just have to state it that way to see how utterly ridiculous this situation is. Russia is surrounded by foreign forces getting ever closer to their borders. And those foreign forces are demanding that Russian troops in Russia should return to their barracks. Now, the moving parts here are obvious. They might be moving in a good way. They might be moving in a bad way. Mike may have a better idea. Blinken may have been there to tell the Ukrainians what America will not do, or he could have been there to tell them what America will do.
Now, Mike, we've heard it from Sergei Lavrov and even Vladimir Putin himself. The Russians say they are not planning to invade Ukraine, that they don't want to invade Ukraine, and that they have every right to stand at the ready within their own borders, especially as the U.S. ups its rhetoric against them. And the U.K. has sent Ukraine some heavy metal over the last 48 hours. Does this sound like de-escalation to you?
No, not at all. And I'm very concerned about what is going on. And I would agree that we have a double standard occurring here. And that's why in previous comments I've made, it would be like Russia holding and even China holding joint maneuvers in the Gulf of Mexico or setting up bases in Nicaragua or Cuba, which is not being ruled out now as a result of this. If NATO forces don't stand down. The one thing that I'm really concerned about that could occur is the black flag, not from the Russians so much, but from the Ukrainian side. They could create an incident. And what's gone unmentioned to date is the Azov battalion, which are neo-Nazi groups, neo-Nazi battalion, and with a history of right-wing elements involved stemming across the United States. They have a network into the United States. They are now part of the Ukrainian military services, and they could instigate something because there's nothing more that they want is to have a incident on the border that will spark all this, because ultimately they want to take over Kiev governance, and this is a reminiscence of the history of that region where Ukraine during World War II actually supported the Germans and against then Soviet Union, and this is almost a history repeating itself if this goes on.
Boy, that is quite scary to hear, especially as Volodymyr Zelensky now insists that his country is going to join NATO. But George, the Germans, as we discussed yesterday, they've been a key player in this past week. The Germans appear to be regaining their backbone, if you will, after their elections and establishing a coalition government, and Olaf Scholz has now got his sea legs. The topic of debate within their own parliament is Nord Stream 2. Is this second pipeline the true underlying cause for this rift between Ukraine and Russia?
No, it's one of them because obviously that gas was traversing Ukraine and being paid for by the Russian gas company and will now go directly through the Nord Stream if and when it ever gets going. But it's about more than that. It's about the Ukraine being used as a cat's paw against Russia, as a ramp from which it would be easier for NATO to attack Russia. At least that's how it looks from the Russian standpoint. And one can hardly blame them. Given the history, as Mike alluded to there, the Soviet Union, Russia, was invaded through Ukraine in the past by Germany, by fascism. And they're never going to allow that situation to be possible again. I agree that the Russians will not invade Ukraine, but I strongly feel that the Ukraine will invade the now autonomous area of the Donbass. And that will bring Russia in because hundreds of thousands of people there are actually Russian nationals. And a million of them are Russian-speaking people. And Russia will not be able to stand by in the light of the Minsk agreement, which granted these areas autonomous status if their compatriots are being slaughtered by Ukraine. So I still believe there will be war. It'll just be a war launched by Ukraine rather than by Russia.
Mike, how are you reading the Germans' role in this?
Well, I think the chancellor is more amenable to discussion with Russia than his foreign minister. His foreign minister sounds like Victoria Nuland renewed, and threatening this, threatening that. Look, Germany is not in a position to dictate like that. Now, they would not allow that British aircraft to fly through Germany with those weapons going to Ukraine, which was an interesting development, which then raises the question just how strong, how firm is the NATO alliance in wanting to confront Russia. It's as though the United States is constantly pushing, egging this on. We got to do something. Look, the reality is neither Ukraine nor Georgia can join NATO. The reason is they have internal disputes. They are frozen conflicts. They're not resolved, and they won't be resolved for the near future. And it's almost a talk of them coming into NATO is almost academic.
Yeah.
We should have more reality in this, as we're on the brink of war with talks about setting up buffer zones or no-fly zones or some no deployment of missiles.
Mike, let me ask you to get your crystal ball out. What's your prediction that's going to come out of Geneva between Lavrov and Blinken?
I think they'll agree to continue discussions, I hope. If we can keep them talking, that's going to be important. The real problem is going to be the Ukrainians themselves, as George points out. I'm very concerned that they could instigate something, because if they see that there's going to be something worked out, they may want to do something that's going to instigate trouble. And what Russia has got to do is insist that Ukraine abide by that Minsk agreement that they agreed to.
All right.
But they're not enforcing it.
You nailed it. All right, gentlemen, I got to leave that right there. Mike Maloof and George Galloway, thank you both. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has arrived in Moscow today to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin as part of a two-day-long visit to the country. The two leaders met today to discuss bilateral relations and ongoing negotiations to revive the Iran nuclear deal. Now, despite speculation, Iran's ambassador to Russia repeated that signing deals is not a part of the visit agenda. Raisi said the trip could be a, quote, turning point for cooperation with Russia, though. These talks follow the announcement that the Russian Pacific Fleet will take part in joint naval games with Iran and China. And the World Health Organization says the worst of the COVID pandemic, the deaths, the lockdowns, hospitalizations, could be over this year on one condition. Head of emergencies at the organization say global inequities in vaccinations and medicines first need to be addressed, slamming the imbalance of vaccinations between rich and poor countries. The WHO also says there is no evidence right now that suggests healthy children and adolescents need that booster shot. The aim is to protect the most vulnerable first, they say, which consist of the elderly, immunocompromised, and healthcare workers. And Israel's vaccine chief, Cyril Cohen, has said in an interview that, quote, we have made mistakes in the way that Israel reacted to the pandemic. He adds that the Green Pass, which is essentially a vaccine passport, is actually no longer relevant in the Omicron era and should be phased out. During the interview, he says the biggest mistake in Israel was closing schools and shutting down education. He apologized for that. The Australian Border Force asked a man returning to the country to hand over his phone and passcode, sparking backlash from privacy activists. To answer some of our legal questions about that, our friend Lionel is standing by to talk about it. And over at the Sports HQ, Steve Christakis takes us to Italy, where one team is climbing up the EuroLeague ladder. And make sure you keep up with all the news beyond the headlines 24/7 by downloading the Portable TV app right now. It's TV as it should be. We'll be right back. Over to Australia now, where civil rights advocates are calling for stronger privacy laws there after two men returning from a trip were forced to hand over their cell phones with the passcodes to Australian border authorities. As RT contributor Molly Barrows explains, it's one area where citizens have very little privacy protection.
A software developer and his partner say they were returning from vacation when law enforcement with Australian Border Force stopped them at Sydney Airport and asked for their mobile phones and passcodes. The developer, James, recounted their experience on Reddit. He said authorities searched their luggage and requested their mobile phones, saying they were, quote, required to provide the passcodes. The devices were returned half an hour later, and the men were released with no explanation. James wrote, the whole experience was traumatic for both of us. I understand that customs need to have the ability to search people's phones in certain circumstances, but this is an absolute abuse of that power. I would never expect that kind of treatment returning to my home country after a trip abroad. In his post, James said his biggest issue with the experience was violation of privacy because so much personal information is stored on his phone, including pictures, emails, passwords, and banking information, and he has no idea what they were viewed or stored. The concerned traveler outlined many of the same data privacy issues that worry tech advocates, who have long pushed for stronger privacy protections for personal information. Samantha Floriani with the nonprofit advocacy group Digital Rights Watch agreed, saying it's, quote, completely unreasonable that people should be subject to an invasion of privacy without so much as an explanation. Within the country's borders, police need a warrant to compel people to hand over and unlock their phones, but customs laws allow ABF authorities to force people to comply, or they face, quote, further law enforcement action. A man sued ABF after text messages were sent and then deleted from his phone by an official when authorities took possession of it at the border in 2014. It's hard to know how many others have had similar experiences because the ABF isn't required to release that data, unlike a typical police warrant. ABF wouldn't comment on the incident with James, but said they search people of interest for security or other reasons in order to protect Australia's borders. Online privacy advocates like the nonprofit group Electronic Frontiers Australia say this is just another example of why ABF needs more transparency and citizens need stronger laws to protect them. For RT, I'm Molly Barrows.
All right, joining us to discuss all of this is attorney and media analyst Lionel of Lionel Media. Lionel, first, your objection here, Lionel, is the use of the term phone. Our phones are our lives. I mean, they're not just a device for calling people anymore. How worrisome is this Aussie customs law to you?
Precisely. This is the age of euphemization. You notice how today nobody's a murderer? They're homeless. And this is just a phone. I just want to look through your Rolodex. This is everything. This is banking, where I've been. Now, Manila, this is my guide. This is the U.S. Constitution. That's all I know. That's it. It's not the flag. It's not, Old Glory. It's this. Now, the first question I have to ask, if I were to present this, if I were to challenge this in court, is what do they want my phone for? Don't you think that's the most important question? I do. Now, it's not like a license, Manila, where I say, all right, pull over, license and registration. I understand that. Implied consent laws say you are to turn those over to make sure you're licensed. Got it. What do you want my phone for? Let me ask you this question. Let's say you were to be pulled over on your way home and the police ask you for your phone. Wouldn't you say, wait a minute, what does my phone have to do with anything? What does your phone have to do in traveling? They've never told you what does it have to do. May I see your tax reforms? May I see your 1040? May I see your 1099s? May I strip search you? Wait a minute. So nobody's even asking the number one question, what does this have to do? That's question number one.
Now, Lionel, Americans like to think, that the Aussies and us, that we're not too different culturally, share language and what have you. So could something like that actually happen here, especially given the continued growing powers of the Patriot Act?
Absolutely. We look to other countries, you remember the expression, Manila, when they said, when Europe sneezes, we get a cold. Mm-hmm. You look sometimes to Australia. I thought Australia, stupid me, I'm into the world of crikey and, crocodile and tough and, really, tough. I mean, really tough. Well, I thought the people were tough, but not the government per se. You look to Australia. You also look sometimes to China for social credit scores. That's where that's going. So you better believe this is going to happen. Absolutely. But again, the question is, what is it that you want this for? And how do I ensure that my data are not compromised? And by the way, if you don't think a phone's important, ask Alec Baldwin, who took, about a year and a half to turn the phone over, even with a warrant. Ask somebody what their phone is and how important their phone is in terms of data.
Now, it's unclear, Lionel, if this man's treatment had anything to do with COVID or if, he was targeted due to some sort of terrorist red flag or something. But do you view his treatment in Oz as even more invasive techniques that are, deployed by those in China as beta tests, harbingers of what's to come here? I mean, don't we have a Fourth Amendment?
Absolutely. Beta tests, harbingers, Vedic, Pythonic, prescient, reading the entrails of the beast, augury. Absolutely. We do have a Fourth Amendment. But, Manila, I'm telling you, I've been a lawyer now for 38 years, and I'm telling you, the very first thing that you learn about the Fourth Amendment is that there's 9 million exceptions to it. But number one, you have to ask the question, what is it that the police, whoever the government, is looking for? If they say, remember a while back, Manila, they had this thing, in fact, when you got an iPhone, they said, make sure that your COVID contact form is turned off. There was this little feature that allowed you, if you were in the vicinity of somebody who had tested positive for COVID, your phone would ring. They did that contact tracing. Well, that didn't work out. But what is it? Now, if they want to see, we want to see where you've gone. The Supreme Court has to answer the question ultimately. What is it that is being, number one, taken? What privacy rights do you have? And what is the logical connection or the nexus between the government wanting to know whatever they're gleaning from your phone and some legitimate governmental purpose? Manila, they know where you're from. You're on a plane. You're coming off. We know. What's the mystery? Guess where I've been? How about this? May we see your passenger manifest? May we see your ticket? Okay, that's kind of reasonably. May we see your license? Are you whatever? But this, pictures, family members, banking,
that is something else.
What if they take all of your information and just suck it into some vacuum data capture, hand it back to you? And I mean, I have a sneaky suspicion, sometimes, Mel, and there's no way to prove this, and maybe I'm a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, I think governments sometimes want to see how far they will go for no other reason than just to see how far they can go and to see what people will do.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Acclimated to it.
That sounds reasonable to me. My friend Lionel of Lionel Media, I got to leave it right there, unfortunately. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's head over now to Steve Christakis at the Sport HQ for the latest EuroLeague action involving a pivotal makeup game.
Well, yeah, Manila, the pandemic's still jumbling around sports schedules, but while we're in round 22 of the EuroLeague season, a rescheduled round 18 game between Olympia Milan and Alba Berlin needed to be played after a COVID-19 outbreak postponed the matchup. So over to Italy, where the fourth-place Milano squad welcomed the Germans rocking those yellow unis, struggling in 14th place with just 6 wins on the season. Ball swung around to Luigi De Tomi, drills a triple for Milano. He led the way for the home team with 15. Berlin actually with a slight lead much of the game. Jalen Smith driving, leaving it up there for the big man, Christ Kumaji right there with the throwdown. Then getting out on a fast break here is Berlin. Just before the break, Luke Sigma takes it all the way to even things up at 38. Berlin would go into the half up 2. Now skipping ahead, fourth quarter, Milan with a 1-point lead now. They didn't look back. Finished with the last 10 minutes very strong. Check out the ball movement by the Italian squad. Sergio Rodriguez, the playmaker, creating as he does. Gianpaolo Ricci ends up with it at the top of the arc, sinks the triple. Then it's Gigi De Tomi wide open on the wing again. He'll hit another three-pointer, extending the lead to double digits. Now skip ahead, under a minute to play. Milano up 6. Rodriguez gets the Alba defender, check this out, on skates, leaves it off for his guy, Kyle Hines, who will bank it in as the shot clock expires. Rodriguez joins the 1,500 assist club with that one. 9 in the game. Olympia Milano taking care of business on their home court. 84-76 your final as they notch their 12th win in 19 games this season. Berlin drops to 6-12. And in the A-League, 2 of the bottom 3 teams so far this season are the Brisbane Roar and the Perth Glory. The latter with just 1 win thus far. Meanwhile, the Roar not really living up to their name, still seeking their first victory of the season. So down in Brisbane, hoping the home advantage will help them finally get a W. The visiting Perth Glory and the Mint Green Kits playing their first match in 42 days due to some COVID-19 issues as well. First scoring chance for Glory, 37th minute. Bruno Fornarelli with a little move on the edge of the box. Goalkeeper Macklin Freck all over it, and we would remain scoreless heading into the half. 68th minute. Ex-Liverpool star Daniel Sturridge making his second appearance in an A-League match, replacing Fornarelli. But here come the Roar. Corner kick sent in by Alex Parsons. The crowded box leads to the youngster Henry Hoare striking in the 77th minute. Scott Neville at the far post receives the cross, batting it down perfectly on the goal line for Hoare to score on the header right here. Check it out again. And his teammates mobbing him. The 22-year-old coincidentally used to captain the Youth Glory football team. Coming back to haunt them now. A few minutes later, it was a sub Sturridge looking to be the hero for Glory. This is what they brought him in for. Free kick opportunity. Nice left boot goes just wide, and that would be how it ends. Brisbane get their first victory, 1-0. They are back home Sunday to face Adelaide, while Glory travels to take on Sydney FC on Saturday. Kids there enjoying the game. That's good to see fans back there in Australia, especially.
I know, and we're just a lot of news right now about Australia. A lot of things happening there.
The Australian Open going strong, by the way. Rafael Nadal, probably one of the favorites to win, might get that 21st Grand Slam. He has swept his way into the third round. He's doing very well. He's in the third row.
Are people still watching, or are people boycotting it?
The ratings on TV, I'm not sure about, but the stands are capped at 50% anyways because of COVID restrictions. So we'll see. But as the tournament goes on, when we get to the quarters, the fans usually pack the stands more. And then for the semifinals and the finals, of course,
well, as we know,
should be packed.
The Serbs are not watching.
They are not.
They are not watching.
Probably not.
But thank you for watching us. That's going to do it for us right now. Make sure you download the Portable TV app so you can watch us anytime you want. I'm Manila Chan.
I'm Steve Christakos.
Thanks for watching.